Malay, or Malayu, are an ethnic group of Austronesian peoples predominantly inhabiting the Malay Peninsula, eastern Sumatra and coastal Borneo, as well as the smaller islands which lie between these locations, areas that are collectively known as the Malay world. These locations today are part of the modern nations of Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Brunei, and southern Thailand. Genetically, Malay and other native population in Southeast Asia shared Y haplogroup DNA with natives of Yunnan, Naga, Taiwan, Indochina, and Aborigines. The most frequency of Y haplogroup DNA found in average Malay DNA are OM175, which can be divided into three subclades, O1, O2, and O3. 32% of O2 existed in Malay DNA. Native Nicobar of Andaman Island had 100% frequency of O2 DNA. Nicobar Aborigines were originated from mainland Southeast Asia. 30% frequency of O3 DNA in Malay can also be found in Darun people's DNA who lived in Yunnan province, which had 100% frequency. 8% of Y haplogroup O1 in Malay DNA related to Taiwan Aborigines, which have 100% of O1 DNA. 6% of Y haplogroup C in Malay DNA related to Semang people, while roughly 8% balanced DNA consisting of N, P, Q and R originated from South Asia and West Asia. 2.3% NO DNA, which is the ancestor of OM175, can also be found in Malay DNA. In mitochondrial DNA mapping, most Southeast Asian had mitochondrial E, which is typical for Southeast Asian population. Mitochondrial E evolved in island Southeast Asia and dated possibly 16,400 to 39,000 years ago. This mitochondrial E are much older than mitochondrial G in East Asia, Q in Oceania, D in Siberia, and F in Yunnan. The first people in Southeast Asia are the Australoid, ancestor of Semang, Negrito and Melanesian. Malay and natives of Southeast Asia shared ancestral lineage with Negrito, descendants of the Australoid. Australoid's ancestor, the Proto-Australoid, descended from the first wave of human to leave Africa, 70,000 years ago. From Africa, human moved along coastal beach of South Asia, that took them 20,000 years and many generations later to arrived in Southeast Asia. 70,000 years ago, the same human wave out of Africa split in Middle East and went up north. From this area, they move across Middle Asia and reach Yunnan. This 40,000 years journey across cold and icy plain changed their appearance to fairer skin and straight hair. Along this journey, Y haplogroup CT evolved to various haplogroup. OM175 and its subclades became main frequencies for people in Southeast Asia.
Aba, Aja, Ato, Dihu, Pani, Taho.
These are words from a Patani language, a tribal of people living in northeast Yunnan. According to Yunnan theory, the first Malay or Proto-Malay are people who came from Yunnan region. They moved south to archipelago, around 4,500 to 3,500 years ago. The Proto-Malay speak Austro-Asiatic language. They knew basic agriculture and became skilled in oceanography and fishery. These knowledge obtained from the migrating route they have taken along rivers and sea. Austro-Asiatic language are the ancestor of Mon language of Myanmar, Khmer of Cambodia, Uslian in Peninsular and Dayak language in Borneo. It is believed that the expansion of northern tribes to south pushed the people of Yunnan to migrate southwards and to Taiwan. Northern tribes people were the people who later merged, to become Han Chinese of modern China. In their journey south, Proto-Malay encountered and intermarried with the Semang or Negrito, which is descendant of Proto-Australoid, adopting their culture, religion and customs. Nearly 6,000 years ago, Proto-Thai speaker moved to Taiwan and evolved culturally and linguistically as Austronesian people. 4,500 years ago, some Austronesian moved south from Taiwan to Luzon, Borneo, Sulawesi, Java, Sumatra and Peninsular, became not more than 20% of population. As an elite group of people, they brought along the Austronesian language, new religion and philosophy and spread it to the Proto-Malay.
Esa, Dusa, Telu, Epat, Lima, Enem, Ito, Walu, Siwa, Sapulu, Kawiri, Kawanan, Kakai, Falan, Darak, Matakut, Macha, Kayam, Batu, Palu, Panak, Beliu, Kichalor, Rumak.
Austronesian did not displace people in places they settled in, but instead they intermarried with Proto-Malay. Most Proto-Malay might only have commercial contact with Austronesian and adapt their culture and language. Between 3,500 to 2,500 years ago, mixed people of Proto-Malay and Austronesian in this region moved to Sumatra, Java, Sulawesi and Peninsular. Later, in the same region, Austronesian people developed outrigger boats. From 3,400 years to 2,900 years ago, Austronesian mixed Proto-Malay sailed eastward to Pacific Ocean where they met and intermarried Proto-Australoid descendant the Melanesian. Gradually Austronesian and Proto-Malay intermarried with Melanesian and some became Micronesian and Polynesian people, a subgroup of Austronesian language. The Malayo-Polynesian language evolved and later became New Proto-Malay language spoken in Borneo at least by 3,000 years ago and was, it has been argued, the ancestral language of all subsequent Malayan languages. Malay historical linguists agree on the likelihood of the Malay homeland being in western Borneo, stretching to the Bruneian coast dated 3,000 years ago. By this time, Sahun and Dong Sun culture in central Vietnam have contributed a piece of their culture to the evolution of Malayo-Polynesian language by commercial contact. The Dong Sun culture's bronze dagger, adopted as a weapon for self-defense for some people in islands of Southeast Asia. This kind of dagger would someday evolve and modified as the weapon of Greece, in the next millennium. A Borneo subgroup moved to Champa 3,000 years ago at the time of Sahun culture in Champa, known today as Vietnam. They brought along Malayo-Polynesian language that belonged to Austronesian language groups. 4,879 years ago, Viet people from Guangxi established Van Lang, the first kingdom in Southeast Asia. The new Proto-Malay language or Malayo-Polynesian spread by migrating Bornean people of half Austronesian and Proto-Malay ancestry, to Sulawesi, Java, Sumatra and the Peninsular and to Polynesian. This language merged with native language of Austroasiatic in places they settled in. In out of Sundaland theory, genetic researcher using mitochondrial DNA theorized that Proto-Malay were originated in Sunda continent, before flooded by rising sea level at the end of Ice Age 10,000 to 6,000 years ago. A study of mitochondrial DNA lineages suggested that humans had been occupying the islands of Southeast Asia for a longer period than previously believed. Population dispersal seemed to have occurred at the same time as sea levels rose, which may have resulted in migrations from the Philippine Islands to as far north as Taiwan within the last 10,000 years. The changing sea levels would have caused humans to move away from their coastal homes and culture, and farther inland throughout Southeast Asia. This forced migration would have caused these humans to adapt to the new forest and mountainous environments, developing farms and domestication, and becoming the predecessors to future human populations in these regions. Probably then, peopling of Southeast Asia might have begun again afterwards, in a new wave migration according to Yunnan and Taiwan theory. When the Proto-Malay arrived they encountered peoples who already been there long before and subsequently, they assimilated with Proto-Malay. Evidence from skull remains found in Nia Cave Sarawak were dated 37,000 years old. It seems clear that this skull, which also known as Deep Skull, most closely resembles the indigenous people of Borneo today and northerly parts of Southeast Asia, with their delicate features and small body size. It also suggests that at least some of the indigenous people of Borneo were not replaced by migrating farmers from Taiwan, but instead adopted the new farming culture and Austronesian language when it arrived around 3,000 years ago. By 300 BC or 2,300 years before present, another wave of people arrived. They came from region of Yunnan with skill of Iron Age tool technology. These people were categorized as Deutero-Malay. It is also believed that marriages between Proto-Malays with other populations from Arabs, Indians, mainland Southeast Asian and Chinese that came later to Southeast Asia, contributed a little bit into Deutero-Malay populations. Between 350 BC and 550 AD, people of the archipelago sailed westward to Indian Ocean until they arrived in Madagascar and became Malagasy people. These sailors brought with them Austronesian language and culture. Malagasy language shared close affinity with Borneo Dayak language. Southeast Asian sailors made commercial contact with Indian, Arabs, Persian and Egyptian imports and ships located around Indian Ocean, selling spices and Southeast Asian goods. 600 BC or 2,600 years before present, Indian sailor, traders and Hindu Buddha missionaries began to sail to Southeast Asia. Indian introduced new culture and religion while trading with natives. They named the region as Malayur, mean Hillian forested town or settlement, and Malayavipa mean Hillian forested island, based on topography of the area which is different than flat terrain of southern India. In 5th century BC, local ruler in Bujunk Valley adopted Indian cultural and political models, making it the earliest Indianized civilization in island Southeast Asia. Ruins in Bujunk Valley may dated more than 2,535 years old, consists of more than 50 ancient tomb temple or chundi. The arrival of Indians to Southeast Asia, causing natives' tribal kingdom to adopt Indian culture and Hindu Buddha religion while retaining some animism into local Hindu Buddha belief. Several centuries later Sanskrit words from India absorbed into natives' language. Gradually, upgrading native language to new language spoken by peoples in the Malay region. Earlier, Austroasiatic was once spoken by Southeast Asian. Then Austronesian vocabulary and numeric infused to Austroasiatic tongue. Later Sanskrit and Southern Indian vocabulary enhancing it into language of the court, commerce and religion. In 68 BC, Funan Kingdom arose in Mekong River. Early Funan probably not Indianized but receive Indian culture in later years. Funan people might be people of Cham who speak Austronesian language or probably just Khmer people, who speak Austroasiatic language. In 150 AD, Claudius Ptolemy wrote about Malayukolan, and Golden Chersonese, or Golden Peninsular in his work, Geographia, while resided in Roman-ruled Egypt. Malayukolan are Greek words meant part of Malayur. This writing indicates trade with India and China has existed since the 1st century AD in Southeast Asia. When Ptolemy compiled his work in Geographia, Roman ships had begun to make trade voyages directly across the Bay of Bengal from eastern India to Burmese coast. Some Greco-Roman merchants in the 1st century AD described huge non-Indian ships coming from the east with rich cargoes possibly from the Southeast Asian archipelago. This would indicate that people of Malayur participated actively in Indian Ocean trade, and likely handled much of the traffic between Southeast Asia and India. A few decades later Roman ships began to explore beyond Malayur Peninsula and reached China in 166 AD. Chinese record mentions Southeast Asian as Kunlun people. Kunlun refer to mountain range from Tibet. It was used by the Chinese in reference to black, wavy-haired barbarians of mountains and jungles from the remote part of the geographically known world. The Chumpas and Khmers were called Kunlun people by the Chinese before the term was applied to the Austronesians. In early years, the term Malayur, which later became Malayu, constantly associated as a name for places, region and kingdoms. Approximately in 100 AD, Indianized kingdom Ganganagra established. The name Ganga derived from sacred river Ganges in North India. From 2nd century AD to the 7th century, the Chitu kingdom is believed to have existed. According to Chinese records, Chitu was built by Kidmo, a Chinese word to refer among Khmer peoples who sailed from the coast of Funan. Centuries later, the local inhabitants replaced Funan peoples. In 2nd century AD, or 1,900 years ago, Indianized kingdom Lung Kasuka arose. Historian believed Lung Kasuka that were located in Sengora as the origin of later kingdom of Patani. Old Kurda is among the main city of Lung Kosika, providing high-quality iron for ancient warfare. Believed by some scholars to have been first founded or rebuilt by emissaries or descendants of Ashoka from Magadha, in India. In 192 AD, Kingdom of Lummup established by descendant of Bornean people who moved to Central and South Vietnam from 1000 to 400 years earlier, who speak Malay language, a branch of Austronesian language. Several centuries later, Kingdom of Lummup became Chum Kingdom. Punpun, small Hindu kingdom located between Kluntun and Trengganu, emerged in 3rd century. Old Gada, a Hindu-Buddhist kingdom, based in 5th century Bujunk Valley, became center of commerce for various local products collected by local people. The port is a stopover for ships from Arab, India, Sri Lanka, Persian and Europe before they continue eastwards. Some of the ships were repaired in the port. Sailors used Jarai Mountain as guidance to Bujunk Valley's port. In 418 AD, Kalathana or Kluntun, Thathana or Trengganu, Gunggana of Perak, and Kuli of Pahang, merge as United States of Chitu. In 434 AD, Chinese record mention, Heo-Wodun Kingdom, located in Chitu or Kluntun. Messengers were sent to China by King Sriwijaya, written as Shilipi Choyet.
Siddham, Niyang Naga Punya Putau, Yaurang Sepuidiko, Kurun Kojemala Punaris Varga, Yaurang Peribudiko, Kurun Saributaun Davam Dinaraga, Dinantujo Kuloko.
By 6th century AD, remnants of Lummup Kingdom emerged as Champa. For centuries the South China Sea was known by navigators throughout Asia as the Champa Sea, named for a great empire that controlled Vietnam and Champa Sea, before Viet expansion southwards in 10th century. From the 1st century to 6th century AD, people in Malay region developed primitive martial art. Through next millennium, with influence from Indian and Chinese, the martial art would later evolve as Silat. In 644 AD, Jumbi Kingdom established. Prior to Jumbi Kingdom, the area was once ruled by Koyin and Tupo Kingdom in 3rd century AD, Kuntoli Kingdom in 5th century AD, which vanished and replaced by Jumbi Kingdom. Jumbi Kingdom flourished and began to take control of the strait in Malayur region, and adopting the word Malayur as the kingdom's name, which later became Malayan native tongue. The adoption of Malayur as the kingdom's new name, perhaps symbolizing that Jumbi had control over the strait in Malayur region. This ocean passageway was the key to control the trade routes from China to India. 670 AD, Srivijaya began to develop around Palembang, founded by Dapunta Hyang Srijayanasa and his retinue, as described in Kitakun inscription 683 AD. Jumbi or Malayu Kingdom became the first kingdom to be integrated into Srivijaya, which later take over control of the strait.
Swasti, Sri Sakabasartita, Enam, Ratus, Lima, Ekadasi Suklapaksa, Bulan Baisaka, Da Punta Hyang, Naik Disa Ambaun Mangalapsi Dayatra, Disaptami Suklapaksa Bulan Chista, Da Punta Hyang, Marlapas dari Minangata Amban, Mama Abayang Paladualak sa Danganko. 200 cara disa ambau dangang jalan 1000 teluratus, 10 bainana, daftan di mata syap, sukacita di pancami suklapak sa bulan, lagu mudita, datan marwat banwa, Sriwijaya Chaya Sidaya Traswiksa.
The Kitakun Bukit inscription described a king by the name Dapunta Hyang, arrived to start his country known as Srivijaya. Historians suggest his origin was from Minun, or a place between Kampar River and Riau River in Sumatra. Another theory suggests that Dapunta Hyang is none other than Phobasa Dharma, from Kalathana, who spread his power by conquering the whole area of Peninsular in 667 and declaring his empire as Sriwijaya. In 673 he titled himself as Sri Maharaja Sriwijaya, or Dapunta Hyang. In 683, he invaded South Sumatra with his 20,000 soldiers. During Hindu-Buddha kingdoms, only royalties were given the title Vamsa, or Wangsa, a Sanskrit words, for dynasty, according to his, or her royal lineage. A person is called Bungsa one, or Vamsa with suffix vunt, if the person are descended from royal family. 674 AD, Islam was introduced to Sumatran coast by Arabs. The capital of Srivijaya was administered directly by the ruler in Palembang, while the hinterland remained under its own local datus, or tribal chiefs, who were organized into a network of alliances with the Srivijaya Maharaja or king. In 7th century AD, prosperous and older kingdom and peninsular became tributary state of Srivijaya suzerainty. Lunkasuka and later Pungpun or Pahang, with Tumbralinga, which were located north of Lunkasuka, came under Srivijayan influence. Though under Srivijayan control of foreign policy and international relations, these states are free to administer their own states. These kingdoms on the peninsula were already a major trading nations that transported goods across the peninsula's isthmus. In this century, exactly at 673 AD, Chinese monk Yitsing, who on his journey to study Buddhism in India, stopped by in Palembang to study Sanskrit and Kunlun language, which is the lingua franca of Malay region. Ancient Chinese used to call the people of Malay region as Kunlun, which also meant mountain or hilly in Chinese language. According to Yitsing, Palembang had become the center of Buddhism study in Southeast Asia. He also stated that, whoever want to study Buddhism in Southeast Asia, the person must also study the Kunlun language as it was the medium for Buddhism study in Southeast Asia. By 9th to 12th century, the spread of Srivijayan influence seems to be extended far beyond their core realm. Srivijayan navigators, sailors and traders seems to be engaged in extensive trade and exploration, which reached coastal Borneo, the Philippines archipelago, Eastern archipelago, coastal Indochina, Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean, as far as Madagascar. 1025 AD, King Rajendra Chola from Tamil Nadu in South India, launched naval raids on ports of Srivijaya, in maritime Southeast Asia, conquered Srivijaya capital, Kadara, and captured Srivijayan king, Sungrama Wijayawarman. Within 100 years, Srivijaya power began to diminish after Chola attack, that is weakening the Chola kingdom. Several states tried to free themselves from Srivijaya sovereignty. Malayu kingdom in Jambi revived and take over Srivijaya as Dharmasraya kingdom in 1088 AD. The war that weakened Chola kingdom opened up opportunities for Muslim domination in Indian Ocean. Persian and Indian Muslims began to arrive in 11th century AD. They settled in many major trading ports. Soon after, the king of Kedah, Pharaoh Mahawangsa, became the first ruler to abandon the traditional Hindu faith and converted to Islam as the Sultanate of Kedah, established in year 1136.
Ijeratinobi Mungstapayan Praseda, Tuju Seratus Astapulu Savasa, Adishaturdandazavara, Sukra, Rajamaja, Lanyapera Mat Allah. Gunaya Sampurna Deira Samua Tarugazita da Tanka Samua Ilai Iarabi Tuan Samua Taru Dalão Swaga Tuan Tatua.
People of Samudra and Pasai converted to Islam in the year 1267. Samudra and Pasai became Muslim harbor kingdom on the north coast of Sumatra from the 13th to the 15th centuries AD. The kingdom was believed to have been founded by Mirasilu, who later converted to Islam and adopted the name Malakul Sali. In 1288, a Hindu-Buddhist kingdom of Singhasari invaded Srivijaya. By 1292 AD, Srivijayan Empire totally crumbled. Kra Isthmus, which once under Funan and Malay culture, were later invaded by Thai people from southern China. The fall of Srivijaya does not end traditional heritage of palace administration. Many royalties fled to all the places that is still loyal to Srivijaya. In 1299, the legacy of Malayu kingship continue in the establishment of Singapura kingdom by Malayu royalties from Palembang. The founder of Singapore was Sungnila Utama, a follower of Hinduism. Singapore grew from small settlement into a thriving cosmopolitan city, serving as a port of call for richly laden trade ships.
Azulula, Denan, Ian, Arua, Santapi, Mareca, Asapa da Dewata Mulheraya, Beri Amba, Manegokana Gama Isla, Dingan Benar, Bichara de Mamareca, Bagi Cercalia Amba Dewata Mulheraya.
Islamic conversion began in Terengganu as proven by a stone inscription found in Terengganu, dated 1303 AD. In Hindu-Buddhist Singapore of the year 1349 AD, Siamese fleet of 70 junk sieged Singapore, but failed to invade the island. The year 1401, Majapahit attacked Singapore with 200,000 men. Parameswara, king of Singapore, fled north with his follower consist of his families, royalties, and with the help of sea people. In 1402, he arrived in Bertum River estuary, which were already inhabited by villages of native sea people, and might also have been ruled by a kingdom in Bertum estuary, since 1262. Parameswara decided to settle the estuary and renamed the area as Malacca. The kingdom's port thriving, as sea people helped direct foreign ships to Malacca, patrolling the adjacent sea and repel other petty pirates. Parameswara married a princess from Islamic kingdom of Pasai and converted to Islam with Islamic name, Iskandarsha. Soon people of Malacca followed his step, converting to Islam. Foreign trader from Arabs, Persia, India, Burma, Indochina and China came to trade in Malacca. In later reign of Malacca Sultanate, Indian Muslim, Persian and Arabs traders would give their son and daughters for marriage with Malaccan prince, princess, minister's family or bangsawan. Malacca's sultans would send their daughters to marry Hindu-Buddhist kings in Peninsular and Sumatra in return for them to convert Islam and allegiance with Malacca. Malacca Empire expanded to Peninsular and Sumatran east coast of Kampar and Indragiri. In 1459 Sultan Mansur Shah of Malacca invaded Kedah, Pahang, Johor, Jambi and Siak. Before the time of Malaccan Sultanate, the word Malayu was only used to claim kings' lineage from Malayu and Srivijayan kingdom. It was during Malaccan Sultanate, the word Malayu had become ethos of identity for population of Malacca to distinguish native of Malacca from those of foreigners, Thais and Javanese. Many royalties willingly married commoners and more of their mixed generation used the term Malayu to refer their customs, culture and language, which is now different than outside of Malacca. The term Malayu became ethno-religious during Islamization of Malaccan population. Arabs and Persian words were used, and adopted into Malaccan language. Arabic alphabet were also introduced and adopted in literature and official government affairs.
شكر جدول كمس صبور وقت حيوان وجه أكل دنيا محكمة أصل مسألة هيدايا صدقة ماوي كوات جانين كتاب.
Malaccan Sultan ordered a decree for native Malaccan to not imitate foreigners' clothing, especially Arabs, but emphasizing on natives' dress and custom, to distinguish themselves from outsiders.
5 perkara yang tiada oleh kita menurut kata itu, melainkan raja yang kerajaan juga. Pertama-tama titah, kedua berbarik, ketiga mulka, keempat karunia, kelima anugerah.
Malacca culture spread inside Malacca Emporium. Malacca custom and culture became exemplary, and it was then adopted by peoples and kingdoms in the empire. Sultan Mahmud Shah ordered for a creation of new dance accompanied by unique music. The song and dance were taught to the Inan, or singer-dancers of the palace, to perform it during royal functions. The dance's movements and its music are so graceful and have all qualities for court performances. This song and dance were Ma Inan dance, which is also known as Si Kumbang China, reflecting the existence of Chinese influence in its music. a bustling city port with 200,000 population and a stopover for different nation in Malacca, the largest population in Southeast Asia at the time. Malaccan literature flourishing with more loanwords from Arabs, Persian, Tamil and Chinese. Antonio Pigafetta made a reference in his book of how the phrase Chiara Malayu was used in the maritime Southeast Asia to refer the way Malaccan people speaks. This suggests that the ways Malaccan speaks had become known as the ways of Melayu.
Bagai menatang minyak yang penuh.
Kalau nak menurut, biar berakal. Kalau mengikut, biar pintar.
In 1511, Portuguese invaded Malacca. Sultan Mahmud Shah fled to Johor and continued his reign from Johor. The Malaccan custom and culture continue within Johor Sultanate. The kingdom attempted many attacks to retrieve Malacca but failed. By 16th century the term Melayu would refer to people who retains the customs, language and trade practices of Malacca through commercial diaspora, in the archipelago. Across South China Sea, another kingdom which is influenced by the Malaccan cultural diaspora, the Sultanate of Brunei, from 1363 to present, has risen to become a major competitor to maritime ports of Malacca. Brunei reached its glorious peak in the mid-16th century when it controls land further south to its present area of Kuching, in Sarawak, Sabah and as far north as the Philippine archipelago. Portuguese invasion of Malacca introduced Portuguese culture and new things from Europe to Malaccan. Portuguese referred native Malaccan as Malayo, derived from Layu. The Malayu people adopt Portuguese music and dance the Brainio of Portuguese dance as Joget or Dance of Melayu.
Armário, bola, bandeira, camisa, dado, garfo, igreja, limão, manteiga, domingo, padre, toalha, janela, escola, sábado, sabão, sapato.
In 17th century, the word Malayu had become a name for a race of people in former Malaccan Empire, who shared a common Malaccan heritage and culture. In 1641, Dutch invaded Malacca with the help of Johor and Aceh Sultanate and agree not to seek territories or wage war against Malayu kingdoms. By 17th century, with Malacca ceasing to be an important port, Johor became the dominant regional power. The policy of the Dutch in Malacca drove traders to Johor port located at Johor River estuary. The trade therefore surpassed that of Malacca. From the Portuguese word Malayo, to refer Malayu people, the word transformed as Malay in English writing when British arrived in Malayu archipelago. The call by Johor Sultanate, of Malaccan kings descendant for unification of his peoples against European invaders, to unite as one race of Malayu, add to usage of the word Malayu, as a race and nation. In 1824 treaty, without consent of Malay rulers and their administrators, British and Dutch separated their influence in Malacca Strait. Dutch cede Malacca to British, and British withdraw any of their logistic in Sumatra. More Arabic influence came to archipelago, especially in Johor and Riau, bringing with them Arabic music that eventually infused into Malay music of the region as ghazal and zapan. European influence on musical traditions slowly made their way into the court, as evidenced by the introduction of instruments such as the violin, tambur, and later accordion from the Western Hemisphere. Throughout 19th century, the use of Latin script began to expand in the fields of administration and education, whereby the influence of English and Dutch literatures and languages started to penetrate and spread gradually into the Malay language. Many Malay books and magazines, written by Malay scholars and European, were published in 18th century. Songkok, a cap originated from Turkish kap the fez or tarbush, became widely used by Malays in the late 19th century. Fez was adopted by Ottoman Turkey in 1826 and subsequently spread to South Asia, and to the Malay archipelago. As early as the 1840s, the Malay writer, Abdullah Munshi, used the term Bangsa Melayu, or Malay nation, and that term gradually entered the public sphere. In education, the Malay language of Malacca Johor was regarded as the standard language and became the medium of instruction in schools during colonial era. Starting from 1821, Malay medium schools were established by the British colonial government in Penang, Malacca and Singapore. These were followed by many others in Malay states of the peninsula. Although many Malays preferred to send their children to study in traditional Islamic madrasah school, the Dutch colonial government also recognized the Malacca and Johor Malay language, used in Riau as High Malay, and promoted it as a medium of communication between the Dutch and local population. The language was also taught in schools not only in Riau, but also East Sumatra, Java, Kalimantan and East Indonesia. The outcome of Dutch-British Treaty 1824 separated Malay nation to two countries. The British-controlled Malaya Peninsula became part of Malaysia while Dutch-controlled Sumatra included as part of Indonesia. Even though Malay world were separated by boundaries made by foreign power on paper, which later became country borders, the Riau archipelago remained a fairly borderless territory till recently. After Second World War, through 1950, the Riau archipelago was a duty-free zone until the confrontation of Malaysia and Indonesia in 1963. During this period, the Malaya and British Borneo dollar or ringgit was the principal currency. Visa-free movement of people, which existed then, is now no more prevalent.
Yang di-Pertuan Agong Persekutuan dan Perdana Menteri yang pertama, masing-masing telah mengangkat sumpah jawatan akan berkhidmat kepada rakyat dan negara. Seri Paduka Baginda Yang di-Pertuan Agong sekarang menjadi raja mengikut perlembagaan dengan berikrar akan menjaga perlembagaan, mempertahankan agama Islam, mengawal hak-hak istimewa orang-orang Melayu dan kepentingan-kepentingan yang halal lain-lain kaum.
After Malaysia independence, Malay Sultanate in Malaysia continue the Malay monarch legacy as the head of state with limited authority. 9 sultan from monarchical states in Malaysia will take turns to be crowned as the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, King of Malaysia. In Brunei, the Sultan is the head of state and absolute monarch of Brunei. He is also head of government in his capacity as Prime Minister. Officially there is no royalty in Indonesia, but many sultans and princes continue to exist, and for the most part their subjects pay little attention to them. The sultans were stripped of their power and most of their property after Indonesia independence in the 1940s. They continue to play various roles in public life. Sometimes some of them are named as possible national leaders. There has been a call to bring back the sultanate system as a way of strengthening local identity.
Perbadanan Hal Ehwal bekas Angkatan Tentera Perhebat merancang untuk membuka sebuah pusat pengumpulan buah tin. Untuk itu, pihaknya mungkin akan melantik usahawan tempatan bagi tujuan.
Modern Malay language is official in Malaysia and regularly cited as Bahasa Malaysia by the government, to unite many ethnic groups, not only Malays. Bahasa Malaysia is a standardized register of the Johor Riau dialect of Malay. English continues to be widely used in professional and commercial fields and in the superior courts in Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei.
Dalam berita nasional, berita utama malam ini.
Dan Yang di-Pertuan Negara Brunei Darussalam bertitah menekankan kepentingan menangani keganasan dan ekstremis yang melampau secara komprehensif melalui pendidikan dan pertukaran.
Brunei government used Brunei standardized Malay as its official language. Meanwhile, majority population used Brunei Malay dialect for communication.
Mereka juga akur Presiden Melayu itu nanti hendaklah melambangkan Singapura.
In English-speaking nation of modern Singapore, Malay language is the national language and among 4 official language besides English, Mandarin and Tamil.
Presiden Joko Widodo angkat bicara soal isu penyadapan yang muncul dalam sidang penodaan agama dengan terdakwa Basuki Cahayapurnama.
Presiden menyatakan apa yang terjadi di pengadilan merupakan wilayah hukum. Kami putra dan putri Indonesia menjunjung bahasa persatuan, bahasa Melayu.
The standardized Malay in Indonesia, which originated from Riau dialect, was renamed as Bahasa Indonesia and used as official language. Evolution of Bahasa Indonesia is differed by its style and pronunciation because of intermingling of various Indonesian regional dialect, mostly of Sundanese and Javanese and loanwords from Dutch language. However, the regional Malay dialect in Riau still maintain its authenticity, even though it is not the official dialect of the province.
Salma, tengok tak lautan di depan kita tu?
Tengok.
Apa lagi yang Salma tengok?
Lautan biru. Ada gelombang. Ada sampan ayah ma.
With the advent of Western recording technology, radio and photography, Malay music can now be recorded and played or displayed for public.
Baik, saya mau nyanyikan lagu Trekete. Wala guli mingatak bukit. Ketek. Tempayan kosong warisilan Malay Trekete. Seekor nuri.
Starting in the 1920s, local social dance and entertainment music such as Asali, Inun, Joget, Doandunk Sayang, Zapin and Must replayed by Bangsa 1 troops. These troops adopted Anglo-American dance band music arrangement, but keeping the local folk character, which later developed into modern Malay popular music. In the pre-World War II era, songs based on Anglo-American and Latin American dance music sung in Malay were very popular. These songs were accompanied by dance bands that became known as Orkes Melayu or Malay Orchestra. The Orkes Melayu, which influenced Dangdut, was played at dance halls and amusement parks, Bangsa 1 shows and other festivities. Modern Malay music and films prospered during 1950s and 1960s. The Malay actor, P. Ramlee, was the most well-known Malay actor and singer in 1950s and early 1960s. Inspired by British and American bands of the 1960s and 1970s, emerged a new Malay genre which is influenced by Western rock bands. The modified rock combo were often called as Kugi Run, an acronym for Kumpulan Gitar Runcuk, or rhythmic guitar band. The music was popular among Malay youngsters of those era. The bands often accompanied singers' performance. And in both decades, many Malay performers began to incorporate jazz, funk and R&B into Malay music. From the 1970s to 1980s, a Western orchestral sound also became popular as musical accompaniment in albums. In 1980s, many young Malay youths were influenced by Western heavy metal music that made them to start groups of heavy metal rock band with Malay lyrics. Heavy metal, slow rock, rap and disco were often cited as rebellious and westernized culture, considered to not have a Malay values. Younger Malay generation in 21st century preferred westernized Malay pop culture. British American music and Korean pop as their favorite. Fusion of Malay and Western music give birth to pop Malay and modern Malaysian rhythm and dangdut music. However, the more traditional music is still favorable among many Malays. the preservation of pure Malay traditional culture, literature, music, dance and art, is still viable and encouraged to younger Malay generation. Many Malay women and girls still wear Malay attire and a growing number of them prefer to wear Islamic headscarf. But for Malay men's attire, the baju Melayu, it is only worn during certain occasion. Today, Malaysian Malay and Bruneian Malay were dominant majority in the government of their country, which is also inhabited by people of various races. Malay in Indonesia, Singapore and the Southern Thai became part of the ethnic minorities, separated by border of different nations.